וידבר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון לאמור עליהם.
Jewish dietary law is laid out in the ancient texts of the Torah. One of the most important aspects of a rabbi's role is to use these rules to check whether food is kosher or not.
We work not so much with restaurants or with factories, we work mainly with caterers. So we would work with people who are preparing a bar mitzvah function or a wedding function and go into the kitchen. We would make sure that all the ingredients being used are kosher. We do something called koshering the kitchen, which is a very, very deep clean. And we would watch the caterer from the ordering of the food until the serving and making sure that everything complies with Jewish law.
Since childhood, Rabbi Wiener and his family have always been careful to ensure that the food they buy and eat is kosher.
I grew up as a child in Canada, in Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. Our nearest source of kosher meat was over 1,000 miles away, and that was never a problem for our family. In other words, there was always a strong commitment that we were a family that kept kosher, and if it meant ordering your meat from 1,000 miles away, then we ordered the meat from 1,000 miles away. Twice a year, a large shipment would come from Toronto. I think part of my identity and part of my understanding that kosher food is part of forming that identity comes from that formative experience.
Kosher food is part of our religion, and if I would, for example, be very, very hungry and I'd walk along the road and see a delicious sandwich, non-kosher sandwich in the window, and I don't eat it, that proves to me that it's something that God will be very happy that even though I'm extremely hungry, I will refrain from buying a non-kosher product. That is an absolutely wonderful thing. If you refrain from eating non-kosher, it'll be wonderful for yourself, for your soul, and for your religion.
The moment you decide, I'm eating this and I'm not eating that because that's who I am, is a very formative experience in a person developing their own identity. And I think the decisions we make, which seem like very, very small decisions, am I going into this restaurant, am I ordering that pizza or a different pizza, they seem like they're nothing, but the moment you make those decisions, you're actually really thinking about who am I and how do I live. The Torah, which is our key text, mentions 4 main regulations about food. So it talks about an absolute and complete separation between meat and milk. It talks about which types of animals are kosher and which aren't kosher, so it's well known that Jews don't eat pig products, for instance. There's an absolute prohibition against consuming any kind of blood in any kind of form. And the 4th thing has to do with slaughter of animals that has to be done in a certain way. For me, religious slaughter is an absolute must. If I'm unable to slaughter animals in the manner that is appropriate for my religion, then I won't be able to eat meat. It's an absolute and not something that I compromise on. I don't really understand what the problem is. I think that there's a lot of talk about more humane and less humane, but I think kosher slaughter, its concern is that the animal dies almost immediately or loses the sense of pain almost immediately, so that the animal suffers as little pain as possible. The arguments against are that stunning will cause the animal less pain. From what I've seen in the studies, the argument is about milliseconds. It's not, I don't think it's a real argument, certainly in terms of kosher slaughter. I have a sense that it's easy to pick on religious minorities, and I have a sense that there are problems in the meat industry, and focusing on something which is such a small part of the overall market doesn't make sense to me at all.
Another role of the rabbi is to educate and train others to understand kashrut regulations and kosher food.
I think the biggest misunderstanding I come across when I'm supervising a caterer or I'm in a restaurant is that people, the first thing they ask is, when are you going to bless the food? And we don't bless the food. It's not about the food being blessed or anything happening to the food. Kosher food is food that complies with a certain number of standards. If it meets those standards, it's kosher, whether it was produced by a Jew or not by a Jew. It's about meeting the standards. This is some wafers here, but as a kosher consumer, the thing that interests me is this little word here that says parva. That's a Hebrew word, and it means that in this product there is no meat and there is no milk. We understand that in the ancient world, part of the pagan practices was sacrificing a child, a young kid, in its mother's milk. The Torah considered that practice to be abhorrent. Slaughtering an animal in its mother's milk was considered as almost evil, as cruel as you could get towards animal. And that kind of became encoded in the most ancient parts of kosher observance, that because they slaughtered animals in their mother's milk, we keep an absolute complete separation between meat and milk. This group are products that are found everywhere. There's nothing here that you don't see in a normal supermarket, but they actually are also produced under kosher supervision. And so you take something like Kellogg's cornflakes. If I look on the side here, there's a mark here, that MK. That tells me that that's Manchester kosher, and that the Beit Din, the religious court in Manchester, supervised the production of this product. Big international companies, it's important for them, if they want to export around the world, to also have kosher certification, because around the world that's a market of millions of people.
Over recent years, two distinct trends have affected kosher food. It's become more difficult to monitor thousands of complex food chains, and yet there are signs that some Jewish people have become more observant.
Sometimes I open books that were written in the 1950s and the 1960s, and I see what people were doing then, and I'm actually shocked by how lenient people used to be compared to today, where it tends to be stricter in the Orthodox world, but also in the non-Orthodox world. I think that there's more of a sense today that if you have to work on preserving your identity, that if you just take it for granted, you assimilate.